If you were at the beginning of our Revelation series, this is one of the pictures that I pointed up, and David, actually, it's a good thing you're here again. David is the one who identified this scene from the story. It was a stage musical and then a film called West Side Story. And it's about these two New York street gangs who are rivals. And, you know, a girl that's connected with one of the gangs falls in love with the guy who's connected with the other gang. And, of course, that creates all sorts of conflict. And what are they going to do with their love? And if you're thinking that sounds like Romeo and Juliet, that is the Romeo and Juliet story. And so this is the same scene, you know, in kind of the original play, the famous balcony scene where I think, you know, she says, what, anyway, here's those famous lines that Shakespeare wrote. There's the same scene in New York City now that's kind of, you know, in the inner city, and they're on the scaffolding going up, what's it called, fire escape, but it's the same story. You know, just the stage looks differently, the costumes look different, a few details are different, but it's the same basic story, maybe making a slightly different point, but still kind of making the same sort of points that Shakespeare made in the original Romeo and Juliet. And of course, that story has been told in different ways, and so here's another presentation of the Romeo and Juliet story. Again, put into more modern times. Okay, but if you look, you can see that it's, you know, it's got that sort of same plot and so forth, but it's added another dimension. So there's kind of a political layer to this telling the Romeo and Juliet story that's a little bit different than, let's say, the political point that Shakespeare might have been making when he originally wrote. I mean, when he wrote Romeo and Juliet, he was mainly wanting to make money. He was a playwright, you know. But that same story can be told in slightly different forms, different backdrop, different costumes, okay? And also, as you tell it again, you can tell it slightly differently to make different kinds of points. And what we've been saying as we looked at the book of Revelation is this is what Revelation is doing. It's taking some common stories, some themes and ideas that went all the way back to the Old Testament. It's putting them on the stage again, maybe slightly different form, to make a different point. But John is telling in Revelation this ongoing story that's actually been going on since the beginning of time, because behind the scenes there's a conflict between Satan and his angels and God's forces, and this conflict has always been going on. That conflict has always spilled onto earth, and it looks a little bit differently in the players that are on the stage, but it's the same basic story, and we're going to see that again today in a moment. We're going to see another way of looking at the same story, slightly different costumes to make a different kind of point, but it's still this theme that's going through. Once again, this is the third time we've seen this from Nenad's sermon of how the flow of Revelation through these sevens, that's a letter to seven churches, not just those seven messages in chapters 2 and 3, but all of Revelation was first written to those seven churches and is a message to them. And then you have this flow. There's these seven seals that are unsealed, and then events happen. And then there's seven trumpets. Angels blow a trumpet, and events happen. And then in chapter 16, that we didn't really look at in detail, there's these seven bowls. An angel pours out this bowl, and events happen. And one of the things we've been saying is this is probably not a chronological story from beginning to end, but each of these sevens is telling the same kind of events in a slightly different form. It's cycling through another way of looking at the same reality. You know, kind of spiraling, so you go around something, you look at it, then you go up a little higher, you're still looking at the same thing, but a little bit different perspective. Okay, now what's different to where we're getting, the section we're looking at in 17 and 18 is kind of connected to those seven bowls, and as we're going to see, it's kind of the same story. But also, it's more and more heading toward the end. When we get to these chapters, we're also going to see not just what's ongoing in history, but we're going to see a picture of the final end. So this story has been going on for a long time, but it's not going to go on forever like it is now. There is going to be a final end, and all these empires that come down the road are going to end. Once again, we've been noticing how in the book of Revelation, the original readers, what they saw on the stage was the Roman Empire. Okay? So they might have seen something like this. I mean, this is a stage production. You can see some of the details. It's about Rome. It's not all historically precise, their costumes, but you know that's Rome. And one of the ways they communicate that is the symbolism of that she-wolf. If you know the legends of the founding of Rome, these two brothers, Romulus and Remus. I can't remember all the details, but they got abandoned or whatever, and this she-wolf found them and raised them, and one of these sons, Romulus, was the founder of Rome. I don't know what would have happened if Remus, then we'd be talking about the Roman Empire and the city of Rome. That just sounds really, really weird. But that symbolism tells us that this is a story about Rome. The symbolism in the book of Revelation, one of the things it points to is, there's details about Rome. So for instance, in the chapters we're looking at, it talks about these 7 hills. She sits, or the beast sits on these 7 hills, and in ancient times, that was always a reference to Rome, the city built on 7 hills. Okay, so it's about Rome, but what's going to be interesting in chapters 17 and 18 is that what's going to be specifically talked about is another city, the city of Babylon. And here's another stage production of Babylon. I think this is from a vacation Bible school in a church in America. It's probably a big, rich church, so they spent a lot of money here. But if you can see the symbolism, if you know enough about Babylon, you can see, like the lions against the field of blue, that's Babylon. And in this case, to make it clear, they actually say this is Babylon. John does that in Revelation sometimes. Sometimes it just gives the symbolism, we got to figure it out. Sometimes he actually says, like the dragon. The dragon, by the way, is Satan. Okay, so sometimes John just goes ahead and names for us what he's talking about. In 17 and 18, some of them are talking about Babylon, and we're talking about 2 different things. Is he left to talking about Rome, and now he's talking about something else? No, it's the same story. I mean, one reason that's true is that in the time of the early church, Babylon was used as a code word for Rome. If you remember our series in 1 Peter, the end of the letter, Peter is sending greetings from people with him, and he says, "She who is in Babylon greets you." So Peter is writing this from Babylon, but certainly not the city of Babylon. It's 99% certain he's in the city of Rome. He calls it Babylon because everyone knows what he's talking about. And because there's a lot of similarity between Babylon and Rome. I mean, the Romans, they destroyed the temple, 70 AD. Okay? The Babylonians, they destroyed that first temple. Okay? So there's all these similarities. And so Babylon, for the Jewish people and for the early church, was that symbol of the evil empire. But once again, we've got this story of the same thing going on. From Rome, you have empire after empire. In this picture, you should note the white horse. That's significant. I mean, that's symbolism in the book of Revelation. The first horse of the 4 horsemen is the white horse. And what does that symbolize? And Jesus later on is going to ride a white horse. And why does that symbolize this? I'm certain there's no accident that he is riding a white horse. He's communicating something. And you see the same kind of imagery all through history, and where even the architecture is meant to communicate something, and the whole setting is meant to, I mean, if I know correctly, this last picture, aren't they, some of you, that's when you were, a young pioneer in your young days. I mean, weren't they up in this raised thing? So everyone is down here, looking up at them. Okay, obviously that symbolism is important. Okay? And all I'm saying is you see this all through history where images and even architecture and how you arrange people and where they stand are said, all of them communicates that, and empires always end up looking the same and doing the same thing. And it's rarely a very good thing. And so we see this story going all through history. Empires rise and they fall, and another empire rises and it falls. And of course, then we can ask, is it ever going to end? As we're going toward the end of the book of Revelation, we're going to see it is going to end. All these cycles of judgment and of stuff happening, it is going to end. At some point, a character is going to walk onto the stage, and everyone's going to clear off the stage. All the empires are going to be gone. And all this symbolism, this imagery, it's all going to be gone. Destroyed, burned up. Okay, so that's all kind of by reminding us where we've been and now where we're leading into. Let's go to this key phrase that's in Revelation 17. So this is the key idea that John is communicating in these chapters. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Here he's actually quoting from Isaiah, kind of original prophecy about the fall of the original Babylon. It's fallen. This great city, Babylon, is fallen. Once again, it's not about Babylon anymore. Babylon literally is already fallen. It's about Rome and what's going to happen to Rome. But the question for today is, and the main thing we're going to be trying to focus on the next few minutes is, why? Why does this happen? Why does Babylon fall? Why does Rome have to fall? Why are all the empires going to be destroyed? Of course, we've seen part of that answer in that there's the persecution of God's people that goes on in these empires. And God is not going to let that go on forever. And it's not just persecution for God's people, it's injustice. Empires can only operate based on injustice. No empire can ever be fully righteous. It can't survive being fully righteous. It can only survive by crushing people in some sense and using them as servants and slaves and taking from them to survive. And so there's a lot of judgment in these chapters, and that makes some people uncomfortable. And we might think, oh, that's revenge. Oh, what is it? You know, Christians are being persecuted, now they want revenge. No, it's not about revenge, it's about justice. And we all want justice. We all want it. You know, when you look at events in history, things that happen, all of you have had that thought, why does that happen? Why won't someone stop it? We want God to bring injustice to an end. So we shouldn't get too upset when we see in the Bible that the Bible actually tells us He's going to do it. God's going to do it. He's going to destroy injustice and bring justice. But the persecution of God's people is not the only reason that Babylon or Rome or any of the empires is going to fall. There's other reasons, and that's what we're looking at today. And there's an interesting change that is going to happen now as John tells the story. We're going to see, in a sense, the same characters on the stage, but they're going to put on a different costumes, all right, to help us to look at it differently and to gain another point or an idea or insight through this costume change. So in Revelation 17, it says, one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, come, I'm going to show you the punishment of the great prostitute. And what's that? Okay, we've got these other characters, the beast, big beast, the little beast. We've had the dragon. We've had Michael the archangel. We had this other woman. You know, and the woman had a son. We've had those characters. Now we've got this great prostitute who sits by many waters. We're going to find later on those waters represent people. She sits over many people and influences many, many people. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. There I saw this woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, we've seen this beast, and the beast that represents Rome or other empires. All right, so that's the same here, except what's interesting here is this woman also represents Roman empires. Okay, if we take it literally, it's a little bit of a bizarre image, but if we pay attention, we can see what's going on here. Because one of the things that's going to happen in the story is this punishment for this prostitute is going to come from the beast. It's like Rome fights against Rome, which of course always happens. Ultimately, evil defeats itself. You know, internally, empires fall apart. There's civil war or whatever, and so this is a symbolic way of communicating what often happens in history. The evil empire grows up. It's so evil it becomes stupid. And people within it grow to hate it and fight against it, and it ends up destroying itself for its own stupidity. So in this imagery, this beast is still the same beast. The woman is kind of the same character, but also a little bit different. But anyway, she sits on this beast, so they're associated with one another. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and was glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. That's a shocking image. The name written on her forehead was a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes, and the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore the testimony of Jesus. This is a slightly different image now. In the previous chapters in Revelation, the way the empire acted and got its way is through force. You know, through force of arms, the point of the gun, or the point of the sword. And so the Romans come with their army and they take over and they just force nations, you know, to submit themselves through sheer force. Again, that's usually how empires operate. But here, this woman isn't getting her way through force, through power, but through the influence of seduction. She's a prostitute. She's not getting the guy by pointing a gun at him. She is seducing him. She's making him think that this is actually what he wants. She's leading him along. And he thinks he's choosing it freely. That this is really what he wants. And what this woman wants is going to be good for him. It's a story of seduction, not of force and power, but it's a story of seduction. Someone posted this quote from Tim Keller this last week, and it was just another one of those, I think, providential timing, you know, when I was thinking about what's going on in these chapters. He says, Satan doesn't control us with fang marks on the flesh, but with lies in the heart. With lies in the heart. That's how he leads us along in ways that we don't even realize we're being led along. And so most of us today, you know, don't feel like we're under the oppression of an empire. I mean, Latvia is free from the Soviet Union and from other, you know, external forces largely. You know, nobody's pointing guns at us, telling us to do. I mean, you know, obviously the government is telling us to do things like wear a mask. Okay, but the point is, you know, we don't feel like we're going to be killed if we don't obey these rules. So most of us probably feel fairly free. And we're not under these evil empires. I mean, we can worship. Here we are worshiping here. And honestly, that generally the Latvian government tries to accommodate churches and let churches stay open. You know, there's no conspiracy in Latvia to try to close the churches. And I'm thankful for that. So we might think, well, we're free, and how does Revelation apply to us since we're not under this empire and nobody's pointing guns at us telling us to do something? And one of the reasons I wanted to focus on these chapters is for us to stop and think how this might apply to us. Is there actually a seductive voice that's leading us in ways that we are not actually aware of? So Satan doesn't control us with fang marks on the flesh, but with lies in the heart. So who is this woman who's speaking seductively? And I've said several times, you know, that there's some really wild interpretations of the book of Revelation, and there's some pretty wild interpretations of this woman. And so I found this image. Someone felt that maybe, Hillary Clinton represented this woman, and you see, you've got Obama and Hillary, and you've got Antichrist, and so forth. So this was someone's interpretation of maybe what's going on here. There's lots of problems, I think, with that interpretation, but one of the problems with that interpretation is that now they're kind of off the scene. Okay, they're not quite the big deal. I mean, I'm not saying they're completely off the scene. They might have influence, but they're not. History has moved on, like it often has as people try to identify characters in the book of Revelation. It's Mussolini, it's Hitler, it's this or that or the other, and then history moves on. We find out, no, that's not exactly who it was. Another one I found is from, by the way, in case you're not aware, there's people who produce Christian comics. If you're into Marvel and you kind of want to find Christian comics, you can find them. Fairly low quality. Generally speaking. I'm not recommending Christian comics myself. But they're out there. I mean, I grew up with some, and oh man, when I'm with my brothers and sisters, we laugh at some of those. But this is one person's interpretation of this war of Babylon. Astrology, black magic, witchcraft, seances, demon contact, sorcery. That's what it's about, and that's the danger. Now, that's a danger, but that's not the danger that John is pointing out in Revelation 17 and 18. And the primary problem with these kinds of interpretations is they allow us to make it about someone else. A different time or place. It lets us point the finger at, that's the bad person. And I know that's the bad person because I've identified the bad person. I know that I'm safe from this seduction. It's about someone else, a different time or a different place, and it doesn't apply to me. And to me, that's one of the big dangers with some of the approaches of the book of Revelation, is that we can look at it just kind of some story and figure out the code, but we don't have to think, is this about me? Is there a voice in my heart that is leading me down the path and I don't even realize it? Revelation was written to these 7 churches, to them, for them, the message that they needed to hear because of dangers that they were facing. So once again, what is the danger that we may face here? Why does Babylon have to fall? In chapter 18, it says, after this I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons, and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. They've been seduced by her. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." And especially, I want you to notice this at the end. The kings of the earth have committed adultery with her, and of course, that was true at the time of the Roman Empire. And a lot of kings just realized, if I just join the Romans, I submit to their authority, they'll keep me in power, and I can continue to have some power. But a lot of it was an economic decision. I can actually get rich this way, and my people can get rich this way. And so the merchants of the earth grew rich for her luxuries. This is a little bit different than the problem of the empire coming to kill people. It's a different kind of call in the heart. Like wanting things, wanting for self. This isn't really the first time in the Bible where the Bible is beginning to talk about and begin to judge certain economic realities and problems. In these chapters, there's actually a lot of ideas and phrases that are taken from the Old Testament that are judgments not about Babylon, but about another city, the city of Tyre, which was on the Mediterranean coast. And it wasn't a big empire. It didn't rule because of its army. But it was a seacoast city, and all the trade passed through Tyre, and it became very, very rich because it sent ships all through the Mediterranean world, and it created luxuries, and luxuries flowed through there, and it was condemned because of its riches, because of its economic power, not military power, but economic power. So, for instance, in Isaiah 23, it says, "Who planned this against the city of Tyre, bestower of crowns, whose merchants are princes, whose traders are renowned on the earth? The Lord Almighty planned it, to bring down the pride of all glory and to humble all who are renowned on the earth." This is why Tyre fell. It became rich and proud. Rich and proud. Self-sufficient. It felt it was untouchable. Even its geographical location, it thought it was untouchable. So John takes the imagery about Tyre and he's applying it to these other empires, and it's not just how they kill people, but how they seduce people through its riches. And so one of the things we need to think about as we think about Revelation and these empires, it's not just the military empires that rule, but there's all sorts of empires. There's economic empires that can also fall under the judgment of God because it uses their money, their wealth, to control people to get what they want. I had a friend, actually, last year they visited here, a husband and wife, and he works for a company that makes snack cakes. And so they make these different kinds of snack cakes, put them in plastic, put them in boxes, and if you go to America, at least in the southern part of America, you can find these particular kind of snack cakes in every kind of store, and so everyone knows about these, and he's, he works for the company that produces these. All right? Now, this company that produces these snack cakes, 80% of their business is sold through a big chain of stores. If you think about, if you combine, Hyper, Remy, and Triple X Moxibon into one huge store, in America, if you've been to America, you can probably figure out what I'm talking about. Everyone goes to these places to buy their things. They're huge and they have such volume, you can get things cheap. When I go to America, my number one goal is to never go into one of those places. But here's the thing, because this big company who sells things sells 80% of the business from the snack cake company, they think they can just give you orders. So they tell the snack cake company, look, you do it, you get the order now, you make us most important, you make us a priority, or we're not going to sell your cakes. And you're not going to stay in business if you don't sell your cakes through our stores. So you treat us best, okay, because we've got the economic power to control you. It's empire. It's an economic empire. And it's pride. It's exalting themselves above others. But it's the same kind of spirit. It doesn't look like Rome, but it's actually the same core problem. I mentioned here this building that we're in, and the significance of the architecture of this building. And so this building is a symbol of empire. It communicates values. I mean, those paintings communicate values. The height of this building communicated the value. Once upon a time, it was the tallest building in Riga. Okay, and it communicated the power of an empire that was here. Now I'm not sure what is the tallest building in Riga, but after this building, the next building that was built that surpassed it was the Sandberg building. You know, that was, when it was built, it was the tallest building in Riga. Do you think it's accidental how tall they built that building? And that they built it taller than this building? I seriously doubt that was an accident. Okay. It represents something. It represents another kind of power that controls us. I'm not saying, you know, let's all go burn down Sandberg. Okay, if you do, please get my money out of there. If you destroy the records, that's okay. I'm glad not to pay the rest of the mortgage on my house. But so I'm not saying you know, don't do business with Sandberg. I'm just saying it's an economic power. It's a similar kind of thing, and it crushes people sometimes. People who couldn't pay their mortgage lost their houses, lost everything. It crushes people in a different way than the Soviet Union crushed people, but it still is a proud power that has effects in people's lives. I don't know if you recognize where this is from, this bull. It's in New York City on Wall Street. I think it's outside of the stock exchange. Economic power. Economic power. And don't miss the symbolism that we see all the way back in the Bible. A bull with horns. What do horns mean? Power and authority. It's communicating the same message. It's a different kind of power, but it's the same spirit. And the same core problem of pride. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out from my people. Babylon is falling, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her she has given, pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion of her own cup." Don't get too worried about that double portion, like God is suddenly being unjust. In other verses, you know, it simply says, you know, pay her back according to what she deserves. It's just a very poetic way to say she's going to get everything she deserves. Not worse. God is just. God is just. Okay? But it's just a way of saying she's going to get what she deserves. But notice this. Come out from my people, so that you will not share in her sins. Not literally, physically. They can't leave the Roman Empire. When we look at the book of 1 Peter, you know, Peter did encourage those Christians in the close by area to these 7 churches to literally leave the cities or to flee the Roman Empire. Physically, they still lived there. But the idea is, don't feel at home there. Don't make yourself at home in that world of values. Don't just accept them. Don't look around and think, oh, this is okay. This is normal. This is as it should be. Don't make yourself at home there. Because if you do, if you just participate in the whole system, then you're going to share in the fate of the whole system. So don't be too at home there. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. Because in her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. I'm not a widow, I will never mourn. Therefore in one day, that is suddenly the plagues are going to overtake her, death and mourning and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. And the rest of chapter 18 is kind of a description of people looking on at the fall of Babylon. It's mainly from the eyes of all the people who got rich through Babylon or through Rome. And they look and they see it falling apart and they're weeping because they know their there goes their own pride and prosperity and luxury. That in the fall of Babylon, they realize they're falling as well. But once again, why? Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. She boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. No one can ever move me off my throne. Talked about Revelation being a lens to look at all sorts of things. And this is a lens in which we can look at all sorts of things, all sorts of nations that might not seem as evil as Rome or Babylon, but fully as much glorify themselves and live in luxury and put them first and above others. It's a temptation for all nations and all groups. So empire in the book of Revelation is not just what we think of empire. There's all sorts of kinds of empires that we might actually participate with to our own destruction. And this is how John wants to reorient our thinking, to get us to think differently and look differently and position ourselves differently in relationship to what's going on around us. So why do Babylons fall? Whatever kind of Babylon it might be. Self-sufficiency. I don't need others. I'm independent. I can do this myself. I'm okay. I'm okay like I am. I've got this figured out. I can maybe do it better than others. And self-indulgence. I mean, one of the things that happens, for instance, in all sorts of elections, and I'm not just referencing, the most recent election that's in the news, but even, I can think about surveys that have been done in Latvia in previous years about what are the pressing needs or problems of Latvia, and the majority of people say, oh, they're mainly economic. Our problems are mainly economic, and our solution is mainly economic. And of course that makes sense, because economics does affect a lot of things. Okay, but does a follower of Jesus mainly look at the world economically, or is there a more faithful way to look at the world? But mainly it's a problem of pride. Pride comes before a fall. Pride is always, always bad. Humility is always, always good. Pride is always bad. It's always a sin. And if we're ever going to rank sins and put sins in a hierarchy, we need to put pride at the top. And I've talked before about how often in church history and churches we want to name this sin is the worst sin or that sin is the worst sin. And again, it's often sins that someone else is committing. And biblically speaking, pride is the big one. It's the most dangerous sin. And the reality is it's a sin that all of us can be seduced toward. We are all in danger of falling because of pride. Pride is always a problem, and none of us, I venture to say, have ever completely mastered pride. It's a lifelong struggle. So again, it doesn't just happen in, political empires, even economic empires, but there's religious and church empires that you know about. I mean, all of you, know of probably, famous pastors who were on television or whatever at big churches. Very dangerous. And pride comes, and then a fall comes. I mean, I know countless stories, churches and pastors I could probably just start naming. And some of you, if you follow what's going on in the church world, or you look at podcasts from, let's say, American Pastor, whatever. You know some of the names, you know some of who I'm thinking about. It's always dangerous. Things get big, they look nice, and let's get the offerings, let's get the money flowing. And then we've got to look nice, we've got to pay attention to what we wear, what kind of cars we drive, and we've got to make the church building look a certain way, and when pride comes, when a fall comes, it happens all through history. It's always a danger. It's a danger for every single one of us. This message, the seductive voice of the whore of Babylon, is not about someone else. It's a voice that we can hear weekly. It's a voice that we need to learn to recognize. Some people think of Revelation as giving this strange new message. And one of the things I want to keep emphasizing is that that's not the case. The book of Revelation uses maybe some strange forms to communicate the message. But the message of Revelation is simply the message of the Bible, including who is Lord and how He reigns and who's going to win. And here again, it's just the message of the Bible, the danger of pride, and how fiercely we need to resist pride, and how carefully we need to look and examine our hearts to see where pride is coming. And one of the things we need to be careful about is how pride can sometimes look like humility. Not just that we become so humble, we become proud of our humility, but sometimes people in their humility want to just kind of remain uninvolved. I'm not worthy to do that. Just let me sit here and I'll do my little thing, but I can't do that, or I can't do that, or I can't do that. And that can be a proper humility, but that can be a form of pride. What if I get up front and it doesn't look so well? I don't want that to happen. I don't want to look a little bit foolish. It's the danger of pride. The danger of pride. You've got to examine your own heart. I'm just saying pride comes to us in many different ways. Things that we want, and ask ourselves, why do we want that? Why do we want to do that? Is this a photo opportunity for Instagram, or why? Why do we want that? Why do we want to wear that? Why do we do this or not do that? Why do we say yes to this or no to that? And we always have to examine our hearts. Where is that coming from? Where's my motivation coming from? Is this a problem of putting myself too much in the center? Is this too much about me? And do I need to just kind of forget about myself and lose myself in whatever it is that Jesus is doing in the world? So that's the primary message of Revelation 17 and 18, and why John dresses up empire in a different form. Not the form of someone in armor with a sword, but of this seductive woman, who's enticing people with her words to move their hearts toward that. We're almost done, except I just want to say this. This has been, another sermon where we talk about danger of certain kinds of sins. I really haven't emphasized the judgment of this. I pointed out the judgment we see in the text, but we're going to see more and more things in Revelation kind of talking about the judgments that's coming. That's not always an easy thing to preach, but I want to remind us of one thing in the flow of Revelation, and just hoping that you will keep engaged for at least 3 more weeks to the end of Revelation. In the book of Exodus, one of the things I kept saying, if you remember that series, is remember where we are in the story. In the flow of Exodus, it's important to remember the order of events and what happens first and how they're related, and then where Exodus fits in the flow of the entire story of the Bible. Remember where we are in the story. In Revelation 17 and 18, remember where we are in the story. When I was first studying this in the margin of the Bible that I use at home, I wrote next to these chapters, here's a picture of the end. It's a picture of the end. I realized this week that it's not the picture quite of the end. And that's the important point. This is not the end. Right now, 17 and 18, the picture doesn't look too good. But we're not at the end of the story yet. Okay? You're not the end of your story. That's part of the good news, is wherever you are in the book of Revelation, you're not at the end of the story. Okay? It's good news. So hang on. Read ahead if you want to get a spoiler. I encourage you to spoil the story by reading the end of Revelation. Okay? I like spoilers. I think they're good. I always try to find spoilers. You know, spoil the story for you. Find out how it ends. We're not at the end of the story. Okay? So let's live in hope. Live in hope. Okay? Jesus is with us. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for this word of warning. I pray that we will take it seriously without abusing ourselves with it. Lord, but teach us to examine our hearts carefully, thoughtfully, but also hopefully. Listen to your Spirit. I pray that we would do that. And again this week, especially as we face things that we can't plan for, I pray, Lord, that we would live in hope and remember that you are Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And we are your people, and we are utterly secure in that. Amen.